Good morning, everyone, and welcome back. We will start our first session today, which is about artificial intelligence and telemedicine with our special moderators, Dr. Jaber Mohammed and Dr. Ibrahim Al Moussa. The mic is yours.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here. Please allow me to introduce Dr. Chris Whittle. Dr. Whittle is an NHS doctor, anesthetics by background and training. He is an NHS Clinical Entrepreneur Fellow and the founder and CEO at QDoctor. Chris is the Chief Medical Officer at eConsult, which provides digital healthcare access in both primary care and urgent care setting in the UK. His first lecture will be about telemedicine. It will be followed by another lecture about artificial intelligence. Welcome, Chris. The mic is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning. It's a pleasure and honor to be here and to speak to you today. So I have two talks to give today, as has just been mentioned. So on telemedicine, first of all, and I, a good few years ago now, 9 or 10 years ago, I stepped out of being an anaesthetist and started a company in telemedicine called QDoctor. So I want to tell you a bit about that, and then I'd like to expand that into what we're doing at eConsult and where we see that going in the future, and hopefully of relevance here in Kuwait. So to talk you through a bit more detail, what I'd like to do is take you through the story and some of our lessons in the UK around telemedicine, around eConsult, what we've built in the UK, why we've built it, and where we think it's going in the near future, how we want to join up the healthcare journey and do that digitally. And then, just towards the end of this talk, about the future of telemedicine and where artificial intelligence can help us. And then in the next half, the second half of the talk, talking in more depth about AI, where we see that coming into telemedicine, where we see it improving the way that we deliver healthcare across the UK. So, I don't know about yourselves, when I started training, telemedicine was talked about, and everyone meant actually telephone calls. You know, the telephone has been around for decades, and people used to just mean telephone calls. You think about how we define telemedicine today, this is an NIH definition from the States, it's much, much broader than that. It's electronic information, communication across a distance, where there's distance or remoteness that's part of that. It doesn't have to be a large distance involved, it can just be a convenience factor for patients, but of course, very relevant in rural places as well. Back in 2016, my question to myself, starting QDoctor in the National Health Service in the UK, was how can we enhance what we already do on the telephone? And if you take your minds back to several years before the pandemic, before COVID-19, actually not many people use video consultation. It wasn't really a thing. It was very new in the medical world. One of the hypotheses that I had and my team started to build together was, if you were to have the visual element to enhance your phone call, if you were to have a video call, could the physician or the clinician on the end of the call get some extra clinical information and potentially be more likely to safely close a consultation than they would have done before on just a telephone call? Of course, around the world, that's quite common now. Back then, 2016, it was a hypothesis. Can we give them more clinical information? End of the bed assessment, eyeballing the patient is often helpful. The other thing was, can we use video as a workforce solution? And I will go on to describe how we started to do that across the NHS. Back in 2016, one of the things that people were worried about when they started video consultation was, what happens if the video call drops off? What happens if I lose the patient? There's a bad connection. I don't know what's going on the other end. They're kind of questions that you don't tend to ask about a telephone call because you've been making phone calls for years and years. So what we did right at the beginning, just to give you background and context for video consultation, was we built a lot of features around how we could support that worry about safety. The first thing was end-to-end encryption. Back then, it's very common now. Back then, it was a new thing in healthcare. It actually allowed our platform to be trusted across the National Health Service, and in fact it ended up being used in the UK Parliament as well, because there's such a worry back in 2020 about encryption and digital data security. We also built features around the video calls to do with safeguarding. So if the call cut off, or if I see something around the background of the patient that I'm concerned about their home situation, maybe something in the sense of abuse going on, maybe I'm just worried about the patient, that people were worried about what happens if I see something that I wouldn't hear about on a telephone call. So we built a function whereby the clinician could click one button, it would show them the relevant phone number to make a call for the region of the country that the patient was currently in to make a safeguarding referral. We did a similar thing for signposting. So this was showing patients, again, with one click of a button, you can send a map to the patient to say, this is where you are, these are your nearest pharmacies, these are your nearest emergency departments, whatever it is clinically that you'd like to signpost the patient to. And again, all of these things, messaging, automatically reconnecting a video call, being able to attach and exchange files, these are all very common now, but back in 2016, 2017, people hadn't done this, and all of these functions were just to make clinicians a little bit more comfortable with consulting over video. Of course, when you start to do more remote consultation, it allows people to work from home or in different locations, which is really important and obviously extremely important during the pandemic when we had lockdowns in the UK. Federated working, was also enabled by this. So back in 2020, 2021, lots of general practice clinics in the UK had to, or were being asked to work in the evenings and weekends and work between different practices. And that was a challenge. It was a workforce challenge. Our solution allowed GPs, general practitioners, family physicians to work across different practices. So one physician could work across 3, 4, 5 practices because they just had to be in one place and the patients weren't needing to be geographically in the same place. It also allowed something called digital locuming. And again, back in 2020, 2019, this wasn't a thing. I don't know if you call it locuming here in the UK. Locuming is temporary provision of a clinician, perhaps for just a shift. But traditionally, it's been very face-to-face only. So you send a clinician goes in physically to a clinic on an ad hoc basis. We introduced digital locuming. And what that meant was in QDoctor, we could create a bank of clinicians nationally or even internationally, and they could be called upon. And they didn't have to be local, they didn't have to be an hour away from the clinic, but they could drop in virtually and see patients. That's now quite a bustling marketplace in the UK. But back then, it was brand new, and it was, I believe, still to this day, a very powerful component of remote consultation to enable digital locum. So one of the other elements, and this was another associated innovation with QDoctor, virtual PCs. So these are computers, virtual PCs that sit in the cloud. So they're not a physical device in front of you. They operate as an entire computer, all on the cloud. What this enabled was physicians to log in with their own devices. So I can be sitting at home as a clinician, I can have my own personal laptop on my desk, and I can log into a virtual machine that has all its relevant software and setup and control. It doesn't need configuring on my machine. It's a bit of a kind of new concept. Some of you may have come across this. What we did just before the pandemic was we connected a series of these virtual PCs to the NHS network. And what that meant is that clinicians, when lockdown came in 2020, they didn't have to remotely sign in, they didn't need a VPN, they didn't need an IT team to deliver a piece of hardware, a laptop. They didn't need an IT team to maintain their computer. They could use whatever device they wanted in a secure way and just log into these virtual PCs. And this actually became, we were setting this up in 2019, for our digital locums, just for convenience and security. When lockdown came in, it became a large part of the National Health Service's response to COVID-19. We had hundreds of clinicians in London, hundreds of clinicians in Manchester logging into these virtual PCs, and it was a really flexible solution at a time in lockdown where it was very difficult to get an IT team to get the hardware out to those clinicians. So QDoctor, we got QDoctor into several hundred GP practices and clinics around the country, covering about 3 million patients. We achieved a number of firsts, a number of precedents in telemedicine. So we had the first STP-wide, they used to be called STPs, these are regions of the country in England. They're now called integrated care systems. The first video contract across a region. We had the first utility of video in an urgent care setting. So in England, you can call 111, you dial 111 on your telephone, and you speak to somebody who triages and sorts the urgency of your issue. And there are about 13, 14 million of those calls that happen every year. And about 2/3 of those get a call back from a clinician and a consultation over the phone. And back in 2017, 2018, my hypothesis, if we add a visual element to those callbacks, can we have a higher closure rate, was proven to be true. And QDoctor was the first video consultation platform used in that urgent setting. Similarly, we got it used in outpatients, so we had the first cardiology clinic in the country using it in London. That got us onto CNN, the big American news channel. I didn't realize till afterwards that was in front of 350 million people. It was an exciting time to show how useful video consultation can be, and a number of community clinic settings as well. So just to broaden our remit of telemedicine for a moment, you can argue that video consultation and telephone consultation don't save time. They may save the patient time by not having to travel. Do they necessarily save much time for the consultation itself? I think that's debatable and perhaps case-specific. We still have this issue of rising patient demand globally that's not necessarily being met, certainly globally, by the capacity that we have to deliver healthcare. About 2 years ago, my company, QDoctor, was acquired and bought by eConsult. And I'm just going to explain a little bit about what eConsult does, which I believe is still in the telemedicine category. So what eConsult does across the country, you can see for context some of the distribution and scale of the platform here. It takes a history from patients. So we take a structured clinical history. We ask a series of questions of the patient, gathered in the patient's own time, and we present that to clinicians. Now, it sounds, in theory, quite simple, but in fact, when this has never been done, it's quite a novel thing. It's quite a new way of taking a history. And you can imagine the kind of safety questions that come up when you first start to do something like this, and all of the different elements that could go wrong. So eConsult was started by a group of family physicians in London, maybe 10, 11 years ago, who started with the simple cases first. And today, as you can see, it's in 2,500 clinics and practices, covers more than 20 million patients. We've actually done about 44 million eConsults now. We have over 1 million a month coming through the system, which is a fantastic kind of proof with almost no clinical incidents, very, very few clinical incidents, almost none related to any software problems as well. So I think there's a testament to the power and scale of telemedicine there. A few years ago, we took it into an emergency care setting. So we said, okay, we are asking safe, structured history questions here, and we're doing it in many cases to patients who are potentially more acutely unwell than a general practice appropriate patient. So let's take it into an emergency department as well. Let's see if we can do that safely. Again, we can structure the questions, make sure that the right guardrails are there from a safety perspective. That's a product called eTriage, which I'll walk you through and show you visually in a moment. It's in 10 emergency departments. It's actually going to be in 20 by March of next year. It's growing extremely fast. We're about to do our 1 millionth e-triage in an emergency setting. And this is where you walk into an emergency department, you have a bank of iPads and tablets in front of you, and you start to enter your history straight away. The third component is outpatients. And we have, again, taken that structured history approach. We've applied it to a specialist setting, and we said, well, can we supplement the referral that comes in from the family physician, from the general practitioner, and can we fill in any gaps, and can we ask the questions that a specialist wants to be asked of that patient? Can we do that in the patient's own time, in the same way that we do in primary care? So to give you a little bit more detail about how this works in primary care settings, you can see on the left, you start off the patient, a number of different ways that you can come into this as a flow. So it may be that you phone your practice. It may be that you've gone onto the website of your practice. Increasingly now in the UK, more and more patients do that as their first port of call. They now know to go to the website. We also have a national app, the National Health Service app. So many patients have that. Many millions of patients have that in the UK. And whichever route they go through, they start an e-consult. And that then, as I said before, summarizes the history and presents it to the practice team. And a number of different things can happen on the back of that. The modality, typically a patient is triaged into which team should they be seen by, with what urgency should they be seen, and over which modality. Should that be face-to-face? Should it be a telephone call? Could it be a message, a text message? Or does that need to be a video call? One more element on this slide that I want to highlight is the digital exclusion. It's a really common and important topic in the UK. Yes, digital accommodates a majority of the population, but there will always be people who don't have the skills or the access to be able to approach things digitally. And that's, when going through a digital transformation, always a really important factor. And as clinicians, we don't want to exclude patients. So what we built at eConsult is something called eLite or eConsult Lite. This is a way that patients can phone the practice and a reception member of staff or an administrator can fill in their history for them on their behalf as a proxy. And it's a specific route through our telemedicine system that's designed and built for somebody taking a history from a third party. So as I said, as a patient, you log in. You're first asked a few what we call free text questions. So you enter in your own words. The questions ask, what is it that we can help you with today? Is there anything that you're particularly concerned about? And then we start to narrow down the history, just as we're all taught in medical school. Start with an open question and focus down. And we have a huge number of symptom-specific questions that can be drawn out. And this is all on a branched logic decision tree basis. So your previous answers determine your next question. Some of those may include a photo upload, which obviously is a huge benefit to telemedicine, that you can have a photo of a relevant issue. And then this is one of the key things, the types of flags that we have in the system. This is not a simple question and answer web form. We have a number of different types of clinical flag that determine the risk profile of that consult. Some flags, there's one type of flag that actually stops the patient right there. Sorry, the answers that you've entered imply that you have a problem that needs to be seen urgently. Please call this number. Other types of flags are just flags that we note in the back of the system and we present in the report to the clinician. And then, as I said, it automatically goes to the relevant person in primary care. So they see a summary of every question that's been asked and every answer that's been given with the appropriate flagging. What we have on the clinician side is something that we call a smart inbox. So this is, we used to send eConsult summaries directly into the clinical system that the clinician works on. And a few years ago, we realized, yes, that's good from a workflow perspective, but it gives you really limited control as to what you want to do with that consult history. you can't manage a flow of them. And as we've scaled up, we've seen that lots of practices have many of these coming in. So we built an inbox that sits on top of the clinical system, and I'll show you how that works. The clinician has the ability within that to respond back to the patient. As I said before, it might be a phone call, it might be a video call, it might be a text message. And that enables, as I said before, federated working across an environment of what we call an e-hub, enabling multiple practices to work together. And what that looks like from the inbox perspective on the left here is I'm a clinician working in my inbox, and I can switch between practices, and I can choose which of the practices, if I'm working with multiple, receives which e-consults. Essentially, really flexible tool to move the different cues, digital cues that are coming in, and manage those across a group of practices. In England, we have things called primary care networks, which over the last few years have really got themselves established as a group of practices, a group of clinics working together. So a little bit more detail on how you manage your workflow in this inbox. You have, as you can see with this animation, the digital queue of consults that are coming in, of e-consults coming in. You can open each one. You may have seen it whiz through very quickly. You can sort your queue, and you can filter your queue. And in the old way of doing things, of sending a questionnaire summary into the clinical system, you couldn't do that. So we've created this as a way of managing your digital queue in a more safe way. I can sort them by which ones came in first. I can sort them by the patient's age, by the urgency, by the number of flags that the e-consult has raised. I then manage the e-consult that's in the middle. And this one you can see is an e-consult light, so that's been filled in by a member of staff in that clinic or practice. And then on the right-hand side, you can see you can signpost. So this is where you make the decision about which team, which type of professional should this patient be seeing, with what urgency. In this case, I think it says 48 hours, and which modality. Is it okay for an email back with an explanation? Is it a phone call? Is it face-to-face? You can also message the patient at the bottom. You can see there's a box there, and you can type a message. You can pull down from a template that you've already saved for example, every certain type of cases, you can pre-populate your templates. So what all of that really allows is the ability to collect a structured history and then start to help to automate and increase the optimization of a workflow. What you can see on the screen here is the first set of artificial intelligence in our system. This is actually an old slide, an old picture. In the last few months, the system has learnt enough to just suggest one type of outcome. You can see multiple here. But today, what this does across a number of practices across the UK is for any given case, the machine learning looks at the system and it says, yes, this is appropriate for a GP. Yes, this should be seen within 24 hours. And yes, it should be face-to-face, for example. So the only reason we can do that safely is that we've got a really structured set of questions being asked of the patient. And we believe that this has huge implications for the way that triage happens across the UK. I just want to walk you through urgent care and specialist settings as well to give you a full understanding of those. In an urgent care setting in the UK, the old journey was that you go in to an emergency department, you go up to see a reception member of staff. Nowadays, post-pandemic, you talk through a big perspex piece of glass and you have to say things loudly about the reason that you're there, which affects privacy. You then wait for a long time to see a member of staff to triage you and to determine how unwell you are. And then there's another wait to see a clinician. And eventually you're seen. This is how we've started to change this with an electronic version. So you have, as I said, a bank of iPads that you go in. The benefit for a system, for a service, is that whereas before they had a busy emergency department waiting room, today they can see the urgency and how unwell everybody is in the waiting room and who they need to see first.
Chris, you have 1 minute to go.
Thank you. So that really enhances the way that we stratify groups of patients in an emergency setting. It goes directly into the clinical system. It looks a little bit like an Apple retail store. And a specialist setting, as I said, I'm just going to move a little bit faster through here. We ask questions that a specialist would have wanted to be asked to supplement referrals from family physicians. So the future, which I'll come on to in a moment, is about introducing artificial intelligence, and I'll talk to more detail in that in a moment. But ultimately, with eConsult and telemedicine, we talk about 3 doors: primary care, secondary care specialist, and urgent and emergency care. What we are aspiring to do in the UK is to join those doors together and really get the patient, the right patient, to the right place, first time, every time, across the system. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Chris, for this lovely presentation on AI. We have quite a few questions. One question from the audience is saying that, asking about in terms of the difficulty of telemedicine in replicating face-to-face interactions, do you think we are heading towards the future where the telemedicine will dominate, or will there always be a role and a presence for face-to-face in terms of primary care?
Yeah, it's a great question. I do think there will always be a role for face-to-face. I think sometimes when I get asked that question, people expect me to say no, but I think there always will be. I guess what we see in the UK is the more that telemedicine is done for the appropriate patients, and tools like ours and others help to triage the appropriate patients, the more time the physician has for the face-to-face consultations for complex patients, for those with lots of comorbidities. So yes, there's definitely a place for face-to-face. It's just about appropriate triage, in my view.
Thank you. Another question asks about, what about issues dealing with legal liability when it comes to virtual consultations? Have you all considered that aspect, or is it taken care of?
It is. So we went through this journey with QDoctor, and to begin with, to be honest, the regulators weren't sure where the responsibility lay, and I had lots of conversations with regulators in the early days. Today, it's very accepted as the responsibility of the clinical decision-making is with the clinic, and it's really under the license of the practitioner, of the clinician, to determine their risk threshold and their risk profile they're willing to accept. Now, having said that, in the next talk, I will talk about some of the compliance and regulation around AI, particularly, and around any software in the UK. You have to have certain things and certain clinical risk evaluations done. And in the UK, we have a clear process where the supplier of the software does a risk assessment, and then we pass that across to every single clinic, and we have a conversation with them to make sure that they're comfortable with the limitations of the software. So it's a nuanced area, but a really important one.
Okay, thank you. Another question is that, are the consultations being recorded for medical legal reasons?
It's a great question. So in the beginning, we recorded. We always had consent pop up to make sure that people were aware. Obviously, there are data protection implications where you start to record and you retain that recording. Today, in the UK, the default setting is no recording. That's just been a move of the market, of the National Health Service, towards no recording, unless clinics specifically ask for recording. Today, the most common use case for that is for a training setting, where some GPs across the country say, we would like this particular clinic to have recordings with patient consent so that we can use those for training purposes. But vast majority now opt or choose to not record.
Thank you. Another question is that you mentioned about the triage. So someone is asking, who takes the triage calls? Is it a nurse staff or is it a GP staff?
Yes, so that actually varies around different practices in the UK. We have things called, we have different roles that take on that responsibility. Sometimes what we call an advanced nurse practitioner. Sometimes it is a general practitioner, a GP, a doctor. Different models across different practices. we have examples of both that work really well. I think particularly where there's a nurse or an allied health professional at the front door, if you like, they really appreciate the depth of the history that we take, because they have a full history there that can be taken, and they appreciate that from a risk perspective. But we really accommodate both types of model, and we actually have a whole team that works with each clinic to say, what's the best model for you and your current staffing availability?
Thank you. Okay. We are done with the questions. We can proceed.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So the next presentation I'd like to give is about artificial intelligence, and a little bit more detail on that. I am asked by clinical colleagues quite often, if you work in technology, is that not quite difficult in a healthcare setting? Many clinicians, maybe yourselves included, have negative experiences with IT systems. They don't do the things that I need them to do to see my patient more often. And my response is typically that we're all technologists, that technology is the concrete that we walk on, it's the electricity that lights the room, it's the stone that's made into a tool hundreds of thousands of years ago. It's everything that's evolved over time, and this is no exception. And actually, if you look up the definition, it's the application of scientific knowledge for practical purposes. Intelligence, and where we're coming to today, and what I believe is the next wave of technology coming through, you might define it as the ability to learn and to perform techniques to solve problems. The point that this tries to make is a fully pre-programmed robot in a factory. It might be flexible, it might be accurate, a very consistent approach, but that doesn't mean it's intelligent. AI was a term coined by a Stanford professor, and there's a fantastic course on AI in healthcare that I'd highly recommend from Stanford University that's online. And that was defined as the science and engineering of making intelligent machines. I believe this has a profound impact on all of us, and it's not something really that we can avoid. This is a quote from a book called The Coming Wave, and this is Mustafa Suleyman, who founded DeepMind, which is now part of Google. And he talks in a similar way about the space, over the space of 100 years, humanity's come from candles and horse carts to power stations and space stations. If you think about that and the huge step change that's happened in technology, he makes that transition to the next 20 or 30 years where actually we'll be forced to think about, do we want to edit human genomes? Are we comfortable with systems that come along and can perform tasks, even in the medical world, better than us and that are more autonomous? How do we feel about that? And to put that another way, I think if you think about us and our generation, we've come through into an era of universally accessible information. We all have a device in our pocket that we can ask any question of, and we can access information. That's changed. My parents and grandparents had to go to the library to find out something objectively true or speak to people. Now, what's happening in our lifetimes now is we're moving to an era of universally accessible intelligence, and that's a huge step change, potentially, in the way that everything is delivered. Now, of course, how does that affect our problem in healthcare globally, of demand increasing more than capacity increasing? Many of you will have heard of large language models. So this is the latest form of artificial intelligence. This is something that this is a big advancement in language-specific, natural language processing. What it does is it's models that looks at language. It takes the context of anything that's written, and it predicts with a really high level of accuracy the next word in a sentence. And it does that over and over. And that sounds quite simple, but it enables enormous performance improvements. What you can see here on the graph, at the top here, you can see it says performance, human performance as a benchmark. So this is human performance across all of these tasks. On the bottom is the years as they've progressed. And each of the different lines, you can see the progress in the last 2 decades. Handwriting, speech recognition, image recognition, they're exceeding human benchmarks. And that's quite astonishing when you think about it. In a similar way, you can actually look specifically at professional fields. So you can say, okay, well, we're going to measure percentages of achievement across medical exams, the US medical exam, USMLE, internationally, other medical exams as well, other sectors. Make those into a benchmark, and this graph shows performance. As you increase the size of these models, with more and more and more parameters into those models to train them, they're getting better and better results at passing medical exams, at passing other exams. So if we step back for a moment and think back to the previous talk about triage in healthcare, we have these data sets and this scale of trainable data to say this is how clinicians across the UK are triaging patients, and this is the data behind it. How can we use those components with some of these most recent advances in AI to support that gap between patient demand and our capacity to deliver healthcare? The first is joining up the system that I talked about right at the end of the last talk. Getting the right patient to the right place at the right time, an extremely valuable thing for the patient, an extremely valuable thing for the system that's trying to look after the patient in the most efficient way. Our vision is to have that inbox, the smart inbox, at each of those doorways, so that we've got the collected history, and we can then send the information to the right doorway, to the right professionals, at the first time, every time. And this is our first step, I talked to in the last talk. First of all, suggesting the team, the modality, and the urgency for this particular case. We're not doing this in an automated way. This is always what's called human in the loop, because we're learning from clinicians, we're learning best practice, we're making sure that it's safe. But having that suggestion there, we've already shown in some early studies, improves the speed and the optimization without compromising safety. So a few more use cases, and these are things that we're building today at eConsult. The first one is summarizing that eConsult. So on the left-hand side, you've got that full history coming in from the patient. It's quite a long history in some cases. One of the tasks that the clinician has then is to summarize that. What if we can summarize it in a way that saves the clinician time, that they can quickly check several lines of text, they can edit things if they want to, but actually, yes, that's a correct summary, just as we have in the kind of medical hierarchy with junior staff summarizing history to senior staff. We can do that in 2 seconds. So we have that as a function that's being built. That could be then saved with 1 click back to the medical note. The second is wherever there's a phone call on the back of an eConsult, and in many cases there are, I need to ask 1 or 2 more questions. I'd just like to feel comfortable that I've spoken to the patient. One of the things we're building is a microphone that you click within when you have your eConsult open in your inbox. It can transcribe in real time your whole conversation with the patient, summarize that consultation into a few lines, and mix that together in an appropriate way with the eConsult summary that you've already got. Essentially, we're doing your documentation for you. We're giving you power over that. We're keeping you in the loop. It's not automating it. It's just optimizing it. And that's a really powerful thing when you do the numbers. That enhances the delivery of healthcare hugely. The third one on the right, this is about your response back to the patient. Do you want to be typing a personalized message every single time? Or would you rather it was already created for you to check and send? It could be really personalized, exactly to that history, exactly to that patient, and this can all be done with all of that natural language processing capability. And we're building all these tools as we speak. What that actually looks like. So this is that smart inbox that I talked about. You've got your eConsult coming in. At the bottom, you've got your response back to the patient, and that's where it generates this personalized response. On the right, you've got the button to transcribe your phone call, to summarize it. And you've already got your summary of the eConsult that was collected in the patient's own time, so that's already there for you to review and save. How are we achieving those things? Well, in the AI world at the moment, there is a bit of an arms race going on. As some of you may know, there is a lot of many billions of dollars being pumped into this space. We're working with Google, who have a dedicated healthcare team. All of the big technology firms are very interested in healthcare because of the effect globally, the effect on humanity. Of course, there is the regulation component to this, and I'll talk to that in more detail in a moment. One other partner that we have, and I want to talk to this because I believe this is going to be more and more common as well. This is a company called Lifelight. There are a few other companies doing this around the world. What this does is it takes the camera in the device that you're using, that might be your smartphone, that might be your iPad in the emergency department. It uses the camera to measure all of these observations: heart rate, blood pressure, respiratory rate, and it takes those through the camera. Now I can see people's faces. Is that going to be accurate? I know I have that response from clinicians all the time. In coming from anesthetics, it's helped me to understand this, because if you think about an oxygen saturation probe that's on your finger, it uses photoplethysmography to look at the infrared components of your capillary blood flow. That's exactly what this is doing. And we have really good sensors and technology in these devices that people are already using. And what this means, in particularly emergency department setting, we go live with this in January. So in a few weeks' time, this will be live, taking people's observations when they arrive in an emergency department. That means that during their entry of the history, so they're answering questions in the waiting room, the system is already measuring how unwell they are. We already know how much it's going to improve the triage when we can see observations in combination with history, just as you or I would want to see in assessing a patient. And it's a really exciting use of AI. So, what are some of the risks and challenges around artificial intelligence? And some of these you will already be thinking about, because we are, rightly so, as clinicians, we're concerned, and we think about risk in a way that we should be thinking about risk. The first one is something called automation bias. So this is the thing that humans do, which is we favor suggestions from an automated system, sometimes to the extent that we ignore evidence to the contrary or contradictory things coming into us. There are examples across every industry of this. It might be a pilot in a plane who ignores who's on co-pilot, or relies too much on the dials and the measurements and doesn't look outside to figure out the angle of the plane. There are examples in healthcare, in anesthetics. I remember thinking about the machines and the dials that I was relying on, and you remember, actually, I need to concentrate on the physical patient in front of me and not get automation bias into the automation that's happening in the machines. So this is a challenge, because if people come to trust the suggested triage output in a really strong way, there's a risk that people become reliant on that even when they see something that contradicts it. So it's a challenge and something we have to be conscious of. There's something called hallucination in natural language processing. Not in the human clinical sense of hallucinating, but what this means is sometimes a natural language program can suggest something that's false or misleading just based on its training data. And it can do so in a very convincing way. It can present something as fact. So this is a key challenge in making sure that, for example, the summary of your e-consult doesn't contain a completely random word or medical condition that has nothing to do with that consultation. So clearly there's a huge risk process that needs to go through to make sure that doesn't happen. The third one is data governance, and this is a challenge both for suppliers of software systems like e-consult and the healthcare providers as well, to make sure that they're treating patients' data in the right way. Firstly, where's the data come from, the provenance of the data around the training of those models. These models that I've talked about have been trained across the corpus of information of the internet. So how do we know, how can we see? You can't even access that kind of trillion data set to see what components it's used to provide it with the intelligence to suggest this summary of this consultation. So there is that question about where things have come from. There's also the question of what we do with the data that comes into us. And many countries over the last few years have really evolved their legislation around where patient data is stored, where patient data is sent. We alluded to it in the question about recording video consultations. It's similar for every history that's taken in eConsult. We have them coming in. We now retain them as part of that inbox workflow to show you the audit trail, to show you the decision. In the case of the UK, we don't take any of that data outside of the UK. We don't send it outside of the UK. So that's a really important consideration. The final one here is explainability. So as clinicians, we want to know the background of the decisions that are being made. We need to be able to interrogate where that's come from, which part of the eConsult history did you use to make that sentence summary. If we're categorizing things, if we're categorizing patients into triage boxes of urgency and team and modality, are we what's called overfitting or underfitting our data set? So if we've trained that on 40 million consultations from eConsult, are we overfitting to those 40 million and being less accurate on new cases? That's a really important consideration. And all of those are really important in explainability to get people like yourselves to trust it, because we need to care for our patients and trust that we're doing the right thing for them. Part of that is regulation and standards, which I mentioned before. We have, in the UK, we have the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, MHRA. We are classed as a medical device because of the work we're doing. They have different classes of medical device. We are currently a Class 1 medical device. We're about to become a Class 2 medical device because we're introducing more automation and more autonomy. We also have something called the BSI, which is a standards institute, and that's just written an AI standards document. So now we have a really clear set of rules about how you implement AI in healthcare, and that's really important that that's regulated. And finally, data security and clinical safety. This box on the right, DCB 0129, that's a standard we have in the UK for digital healthcare solutions. So any software that has a clinical purpose has to have a DCB 0129 assessment done. I look after this in eConsult, and I have a team of safety professionals and clinicians who go through and make something called a clinical safety case report. So this is where we document the risk evaluation that we've gone through, the post-deployment surveillance of the product, how is it doing, what are the reporting incidents that are coming back to us, and we have a big document called a hazard log, which goes through the severity and the likelihood of all the different hazards for every piece of software that we produce. And as I mentioned in the question earlier, we hand that over to every healthcare provider. They create their own version of that based on what we have provided them as a detailed context for the software and the associated risks that we know are in the product. So in summary, I think AI is a hugely important evolution or revolution that's coming. It's already here. It's already in our smartphones that are in our pockets. It's just a little bit under the surface for some of us. And it's not always clear how it's going to affect our medical practice. We think it can improve patient outcomes. We think we can help people deliver more healthcare. We can enhance standardization because we've got histories collected in a more standardized way, and we know that's safe across 44 million consultations. It also helps to reduce the cost. You can have more healthcare delivery with the same healthcare staff. Telemedicine historically was pre-digital. It was telephone calls. It was untranscribed, unrecorded. With consultation types like this, we have more history taking that's happening that's digital, and therefore the data sets are there, and therefore we have more ability to automate and improve the delivery of that healthcare. I would argue potentially that it's unethical not to think about AI and not to use AI in healthcare. We've got this amazing technology that's coming through. If we didn't use it, are we doing the best thing for our patients? I believe that we should be using it, that we should be enhancing healthcare for them because they deserve to have that. So that is my takeaway message. We should be using more AI as we go, but as long as that's in a safe context and it's done correctly. I hope that's been helpful to walk you through telemedicine and subsequently AI in the UK. We're really excited at eConsult. We're progressing very quickly in the way that we deliver healthcare, and it's been fantastic to speak to you. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chris. You finished ahead of time, which is good.
Great.
A question that I wanted to pose is that in Kuwait, we have a large ethnic diversity, and I'm sure in the UK as well. Is the system able to deal with the issue of the language barrier, different languages, or this is an ongoing future thing you're working on?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the benefit of working with big tech companies on this is that they've trained this system or these systems on nearly every language in the world. So I guess that the ongoing challenge is making sure that the standard of achievement is the same across every language. Thankfully, companies like Google already do translation at scale. So Google Translate, which you may have used whenever you enter something in Google in a language and ask it to translate it. They've done a lot of that. So I guess the short answer is yes, there is language translation that goes on. We don't yet have language translation in the eConsult product, but the AI is ahead of us. The AI is capable of translating natural language. We just need to build the interface for different languages in the UK.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Another question was basically asking about what happens in the eventuality of any, let's say, medical errors, and also as a co-question of medical malpractice. Can it arise, and does it arise?
There are examples. I think, again, it comes down to accountability. So the nice thing is there's a clear audit trail of what's happened and every decision that's been made. You could argue that there's less, because of the clear audit trail of everything that's happened, you could argue that there's less risk of you seeing a gap or of a miscommunication happening, because you can see, I'm thinking of in general practice, where you have an e-hub and there's a consultation that happens and it's managed across practices. You can see who's moved the information, where they've moved it, where they've asked for clarification from the patient. So it's very, very clear. Whereas if everything was on the phone, you may not remember. A year later, a malpractice question comes to you as the clinician. It's a panic moment. Can I remember that patient from all the hundreds I've seen? So I would argue that there's a nice audit trail to support that. Yes, there are always malpractice questions, and this is something for constant improvement. But my view would be that we help to show exactly what has happened and hopefully support clinicians with that.
Is it included, or the clause of medical malpractice or medical errors within the virtual consulting system? Is it included already in terms of legal aspect?
Yeah, so I guess what we're not doing is we're not making decisions. We're keeping the clinician in the loop at every stage. So that means that the accountability is always with the clinician. We're not making decisions for them. So if we say this eConsult is appropriate for a GP, appropriate for an appointment within the next week, and is okay for a telephone call, it's a suggestion at this point. So we're only making a suggestion. The clinician should be the one who's reviewing it and ideally slightly speeding up their process. So the accountability is very much with the human. We're not changing that. We're just trying to speed up and automate some of that documentation in a more efficient way.
Okay. And an obvious question that several members in the audience were posed is that what is the feedback on, the patient feedback on the difference between the face-to-face, the let's say the human touch, the warmth, versus the e-consult. Do you have any feedback,
Yeah.
or are there any actual real-world studies?
Yeah, it's interesting. It varies, to be honest. I think we have huge numbers of patients who say, this is really nice to be able to tell my story in my own time. I have more than 10 minutes with the doctor. I can tell them all about my history. If I'm asked for a family history in a face-to-face consultation, I haven't spoken to my relatives, I'm not sure, and I can take my time with this, or I can do it around my working commitments. There are always people who say, well, I would prefer to have a face-to-face. To be honest, since the pandemic, there are fewer of those patients. More people have been, I guess, forced in the pandemic to realize that remote can work very well. But as I said before, there's still a place for face-to-face. What we're trying to do is free up more time for face-to-face, that those that clinically need it and those that want it and prefer it.
I would assume the elderly are less inclined to use the virtual system.
Generally, yes, generally. Although lots of exceptions to that. We have a 106-year-old who went through the system in an emergency department and was very happy about it and wrote up a case study with us. So there are always exceptions, but yes, you're right.
Thank you so much. One question, interesting question. He mentioned that he is a member and a co-founder of Kuwait Telemedicine. He's saying there are certain cases that we are not allowed to ask, for example, dermatology and reading lab tests. Do you have any similar constraints or restrictions on
Interesting.
cases?
Dermatology is a really common one, actually, for us. The ability to upload a photo to give certainly primary care physicians some more information to then triage and determine, for example, is this potentially melanoma? They're not necessarily saying, I will diagnose this based on this image, but they're able to triage and they say, well, that definitely isn't a melanoma. That's clearly not a high risk because I can see it. It gets harder if you're asking people to diagnose completely remotely. That's another level of risk. We don't have restrictions. We pass everything in terms of accountability and decision to the clinicians who make the risk assessment themselves. Am I comfortable doing this? We don't read lab results at the moment. So, you could argue there is some risk in that. But in answer to that question, no, there aren't really any particular specialties that are restricted at the moment.
Thank you so much, Doctor.
Okay.
And now Dr. Dina will give the certificate of thanks to Dr.
Thank you.
Chris. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Chris. Thank you.
Please allow me to introduce Dr. Mohammed Abdulrazak Nassif. He's an emergency physician from the United Arab Emirates. He holds several academic and vocational qualifications in emergency medicine, medical education by simulation, e-learning, and AI in medicine. He will talk to us about primary healthcare in the era of AI. Welcome, Dr. Mohammed. The mic is yours.
Shukran, Doctor. Thank you very much. It always gives me great pleasure to be here in Kuwait. I regard myself as a GCC citizen. I'm Bahraini living in the Emirates, and my maternal side family is in Kuwait, so it's quite an exciting journey for me. Thanks, Chris, for your lecture. I think you covered a lot of the topics that I might be also elaborating on later on. So over the next few minutes, inshallah, we'll be talking about a general introduction to AI. We'll talk about the benefits of using AI in primary care, some challenges and considerations that we need to keep in mind in this AI journey. It's an inevitable transition, I think, that we need to go through, and leave you with some ending notes. I'm hoping over the next few minutes to be able to excite you enough about AI, to be involved more, not just use it, maybe to be part of the development team into these things. On the other hand, I hope to be striking the balance of disappointing you enough in AI to be careful about all the pitfalls that you might inadvertently go through. So what is AI? We heard about this, the second definition, the one by John McCarthy. There is one that's a bit earlier than that from the University of Manchester, from Alan Turing. I'm a bit biased because I'm a Manchester guy myself, but he also talked a lot about AI. I really like his definition because it focuses on learning. If you think about it, computers have been there for a very long time. They can do calculations really fast. They can do a lot of things that we cannot even dream of doing as with normal human intelligence. But they're not smart. They're just programmed to do a specific thing in a specific way. So there is no intelligence. They're just really good at doing very tiny things. Hence the name server. You know how you communicate with the server, al-khadim? They just do what you tell them to do. They're not smart, they're not telling you anything. But with AI, there's a learning element. You will hear a lot in the AI field that there's an algorithm, then you train the algorithm, and then you start using it. You've all heard of ChatGPT, of course, right? What does GPT stand for? Chat, we all know. GPT, it's a generative, it makes things. P for pre-trained, you actually train it on a huge amount of data. And transformer, it's just the way that it does things. There are many models of AI, and transformers basically look at how the words look together and change them into something else. So it takes a lot of text, transforms it, and gives it back in a different way. If you ask the Encyclopedia Britannica, it would tell you something also I like. It talks about tasks, not just cognitive things and learning. It's about doing things. And it not only comes through a computer, it can come through a robot. There are many things we do in our daily lives that we think are simple, but they're a bit difficult for a system to do. Like organizing things, if you want to organize blocks. A child takes some time, and then when they're still, infants, they start learning how to do it. An AI would need some training to be able to do things like that. And like recently, there was a lot of excitement with a robot from Tesla that's starting to organize blocks into different similar shapes. And to be honest with you, any man who tried to organize the drawer in his bedroom, he will know this requires a female-level intelligence to be able to do it. So Turing came up with the Turing test. It's a bit old, but to some extent it was relevant, maybe not until last year. So he told it it's an imitation game. So how do you tell if this system is intelligent, not just really fast at doing simple things? So basically, you have a system, the one you are testing, and you have a human being. They are separated, and you don't know about which is which, but you know that you have one human and one system. And you communicate with it using text. So if you can communicate with them and you cannot tell which is which, then this is an intelligence. It's a human-level intelligence. So this is the Turing test. If you can tell, you can guess, well, this sounds more human, this sounds more systemized, then that is not an intelligent level test. What do you think of ChatGPT? Do you think it passes the Turing test? It's pretty good, right? Yeah? There's a spectrum. There are many ways of classifying AI. I'll go through a few of them. So you'll keep hearing different terms and overlapping terms because it's quite a messy area, actually. But it's starting to get clearer and clearer. So there is narrow AI or weak AI, which is actually most of what we have. It's actually all what we have right now. All the interesting things we have, ChatGPT, the computer vision, so on, it's all not narrow AI, it's weak AI. Theoretically, there is a general or strong AI, or AGI, artificial general intelligence, which understands and reasons, not just regurgitates or does simpler tasks. And also there's the theoretical, the thing that, I think Everybody's scared of the Skynet Terminator kind of thing, where you have super intelligence, where it is smarter than us and might decide we're not a very good species and might kind of eliminate humans from the picture. ChatGPT, do you think it can reason and understand? Who uses ChatGPT regularly? Yep. Yeah. Not so regularly. What do you think? You ask it questions, difficult questions, it gives you very good answers. Sometimes hallucinates, we'll go through that, but it gives you answers. That's not reasoning and intelligence. It can write an essay for you. Not really. It's a transformer. It takes words, sees links of how far this word comes from that word, and in a very complex way can regurgitate a very nice essay for you. It's literally like an autocomplete you have on your phone, where it gives you 1 or 2 words. This one can give you like 100 words or 500 words ahead. That's essentially it. And you can test that with something you could do later on today or in the evening. Go into ChatGPT and do a mathematical test for it. Ask it something really simple. You can do with the calculators, like 5,739 plus 8 million, and so on. You know what I mean. A very long calculation, but it's very simple. Just additions, subtractions. Do it with your calculator or Excel, and do it with ChatGPT. Very likely, you'll end up with the wrong answer with ChatGPT. The funny thing about it, it's going to be not just a wrong answer, it's going to look like the right answer. If you just look at them, you think, this is the right answer. But then when you compare the digits, no, it actually missed the right answer. It was just learning of how these digits and numbers fit together in the training data. And the right answer will look like. It's kind of a smart student, I don't want to use the right word, in class who just gives you something that sounds right, but it's not right. So perhaps the best way of looking at ChatGPT is like a very smart friend. He read a lot of things, and very confident friend, a bit overconfident. You can trust them, but with a pinch of salt. They can make up things for you. Another easy test you could try is if you ask it to give you some YouTube videos on a particular topic. It will suggest a number of YouTube videos, very credible titles. Even it will give you the URLs if you want. The URLs don't work. If you take the titles and search for these videos, you won't find them. It just made it up. Okay? Just very confidently made it up, and that's the scary part. You might have heard over the last 2-3 weeks about OpenAI having Q star. There's a lot of talk about it. They fired the CEO, then rehired the CEO, and so on. There is talk that probably there might be an element of general artificial intelligence, but we'll wait and see, I think. So a lot of the time when you read the literature or hear about AI or somebody tries to sell you a product on AI, they'll be talking about something called machine learning, basically. So when you train it with data and learns about patterns, get some insights. And over time, there have been certain developments. So we have general machine learning, simply looking at patterns. A simple implementation we have in our center, training center, is we put a machine learning module on our learning management system. So it will look at what are the courses that you like seeing, what are the things you have completed, and it's going to give you some suggestions. So if you really like diabetes courses, it will suggest more diabetes courses. We're pilot testing another system now that's looking at your competencies and hopefully giving you something related to competencies. That's we're still under testing. Deep learning uses another way of recurrent neural networks where it goes through the thought process several times and tries to get a deeper insight, as the name suggests. And the generative AIs, similar to large language models, there is an overlap between them where it can create material for you, whether it's text or images or so on. So how many of you use AI on a regular basis? Only one? Are you sure? 3? Dubai people don't count. How many people have a smartphone in their pockets or bags? Yes, you all use AI. Think about computer vision, for example. You use face recognition to open your phone, and then you use photo enhancements for all your Snapchat, for all the nice photos, so it removes or any wrinkles that may or may not be there. You have Snapchat filters. I mean, how else would it know that this is your face and not put the filter on the background, right? Natural language processing, you talk to it, it writes a text and so on. Google Translate, yes? Generative like ChatGPT, Google Bard, another one I'd recommend using, a Microsoft Copilot, which is basically based on ChatGPT. And you have things that are kind of mixed using multiple different ways, like Siri, Google Assistant, and Alexa. Do you use any of those on a daily basis? Yes, everybody uses AI. It's just, this is a very important message. AI is going to sneak up on us in medicine, just like it snuck up on us in our phones. Right? It's going to be there. It's not something that's optional. Just a quick go over this. I mean, having an AI, creating an AI algorithm that's usable in healthcare, it's a bit like creating a medical device, like Chris said. So it's quite a long process. First, you want to define the problem. It should be a very specific problem. Remember, it's not as intelligent as we think it is. Gathering and the data to be able to train it on. This is a really painful thing. It sounds simple, but we have a lot of data in our electronic health systems and different databases, but it's not really as organized as you would like it to be a lot of the time. Getting an algorithm, you can create an algorithm like a lot of the big companies, or you could use algorithms that are kind of available in the open source. Training them, this is the key point. And then you need to evaluate, did they learn something? And more important, not just that they have done it right, you want to validate. So you keep some of the data you gathered in the second step, and you put and use it again in the validation algorithm. You want to make sure that if you give it new set of data, it will still keep the correct performance. You need, as just like in clinical trials, you want to do like a phase 3 where you're going to a real life scenarios, trying to get more. Keep monitoring it, because just like with humans, whenever you're doing training, people could start kind of learning all the wrong things. And you need to always keep an eye for the algorithm, whether it could deviate, it could be doing a great job, but with time start to learn wrong things and move in the wrong direction. Of course, there are some ethical considerations we need to keep in mind, especially there is data everywhere. Are we allowed to use it or not? And so on. We'll go in depth in a later slide. And finally, you can go for regulatory approvals, which is also quite a big step in itself. So it's not easy, but we really need to be involved in this. This is coming. If we don't get involved, we'll just end up with products which may fit our needs or fit some other person's needs. All right. I'll go through like 10 different examples. Some of them are kind of covered by Chris earlier. These are 10 of many. It's just I tried to select some before going on to the potential issues. So risk stratification, I think this is something which AI is really good at. It needs to go through you can go through your medical history, demographics, how old, tall, short, male, female, lifestyle factors, and it can help you identify people at risk. This person is at risk of diabetes, or this person is at risk of having retinal complication, or this person was admitted with heart failure, they are at a higher risk of readmission. And then as family physicians, you could target these people. So instead of them developing diabetes, you could catch them early, work on their weight, work on their lifestyle, help them to avoid not have diabetes, or optimize their cardiac care so they don't end up being admitted, which is better for the patient, better for you, and cheaper for the system. Clinical decision support. This comes in various things. I mean, we all use decision support of some sort. Sometimes it's Google, sometimes it's more reliable sources, up to date and others. And so what it can do is give you recommendations. So at the end of the day, it's recommending. It's a good friend. You could take it or leave it. At the end of the day, don't forget, you are the clinician. You are the one responsible for this patient. So if the AI does any mistake, we cannot blame the IT department. It's our fault. It's a bit like having a junior with you. You're always supervising them, counter-signing on what they do, and so on. So it can assist you. In a way, how many of us, not the ones staying in the hotel, how many walked here to the hotel this morning? Nobody, right? One person walked here to the hotel this morning. But if you're, most of us, we all have legs or able to walk or somehow or use a wheelchair, correct? It did not replace our ability to move the car, but it did help us to move faster, right? Imagine if you were walking from home to here, you'll still be kind of enjoying the nice weather in the morning and kind of missed a few lectures. Or imagine doing that in the nice sun in July in Kuwait, you'll be really enjoying yourself. So AI should really assist us to get to do our job faster rather than, I'm not really worried about replacing us unless we do something wrong. Personalized care plans, so as you could see from the previous slides, we have a lot of information in EHR. I was really excited to see the achievements in primary care in 2021-23 in electronic health record. So you have a huge amount of data. A lot of it is unfortunately unstructured, just kind of general notes. If the AI can go through this, give you some recommendations, and then you can make decisions with your patient about their care. By the way, all the stuff that I will talk about, all the 10 applications, the technology is there. Sometimes it's mature and available as a product, like, for example, eConsult, or some of the issues, and some is still in academic, and some probably nobody has bothered to do it, but the technology is there. I'll give you a not so AI example about how technology can be there, but we're not there yet. A few years ago, I bought a car with the adaptive cruise. It kind of speeds up when the car in front of me speeds up and slows down, just keeps me with the maximum speed limit. You know the Sharjah traffic, Dubai traffic, yes, everybody knows in the UAE, just like Kuwait traffic. I discovered that, if I'm above 25 kilometers per hour, I can activate the system. And it keeps working even when I go below 25 kilometers per hour. My car was not autonomous driving. It was not advertised as autonomous driving. It is definitely not autonomous driving. But I pretty much used it as autonomous driving. So, whenever the car in front of me stops, I stop with it, and I'm relaxed. It helped reduce my cognitive load and stress level going to Dubai and returning from Dubai. I'm a Sharjah person, so it's quite a journey sometimes. Does it do crazy things every now and then, start jumping and trying to hit the car in front of me? Yes, so I'm still in control. If it hits somebody, it's still my fault. But the technology was there, but it needed a bit more tweaking. A lot of the things, the innovations that we are looking for, we do have the technology that can enable us. It's a matter of putting all the right things together. Many of you would have been very much aware of the different ways where AI could help with different technologies. For example, retinal, it is almost as good as an ophthalmologist and sometimes a little bit better. Similar thing with mammograms. So if you're having a diabetes clinic, then you don't need an ophthalmologist there all the time. You might just need an optometrist who would operate the machine, take good pictures, and the system could read them for you and help to triage your patients. Similar thing with mammograms or other radiological images where we could use it for screening, and which is part of what we do in primary care. Again, it could help us detect things early on and augment the radiologist. There is a system which is an application in one of the hospitals where it's more emergency medicine, I apologize. It could detect a stroke in a CT scan, even when, normal advanced radiologists wouldn't see anything. It's just the pattern is there, but it's not available for us. We're not used to it. Using some apps are there that you could just take a photo of a suspected melanoma. It tells you. No endorsement of anything. I think it's called Visual DX. So it would help you risk stratify and help you with diagnosing some of the patients. I had a funny nevus on my leg, and I thought, I can't remember what this is all about. Dermatology was not something I really cared about as an emergency physician. And then I realized, then it gave me a diagnosis. Now I'm quite happy about it. Similar things with normal radiology. So, if you're having people with a chest X-ray, at least it will tell you if it's normal, abnormal, help you triage. Something to keep in mind, What if it tells you it's normal, but you think there's something wrong? What if it tells you it's abnormal, but you think the story doesn't match the diagnosis it's telling me? What do you do next? It's one of those biases that are in the system. This is something that there are products available in the market, and there are some simpler things which only do part of it, which we have an implementation in our system. So you could transcribe, you could just see your patient, do the stuff that you really went into medicine to do, see your patient, talk to them, examine them. It would transcribe the encounter, it would extract and summarize it, and then just give you something that you could sign off or correct. We use a speech-to-text, which is more manual. It is a bit scary moving as very fast into these, so we're kind of building the culture of having AI sneak up on our physicians in the system. So you could save time and have better documentation, especially if you're in quality, you know that documentation is not a great thing in many systems. Administrative automation. You know, EHR is great. It was aimed at billing and insurance. And a lot of your time could go into coding your patient. What's the ICD code for this? What are the diseases? Somebody has to take care of this. Sometimes a physician, sometimes an informatics nurse, sometimes other coding stuff. And this could help speed up the process, reduce error, and make things faster, giving us more time to spend with our patients, which is what we really want to do. So AI may actually help augment us, support us, to be able to do the thing that we and our patients want, is to spend more time with them. Sorry about the picture, it's kind of funny. I couldn't find a picture of a doctor throwing away papers, so I asked DALI to make one for me. I think it lacks grandizer for some reason, so it's patient education engagement. You know, there are some simple things, low-risk things, which you'll find creeping into the market, like chatbots that can give basic, simple advice, or like we saw in the previous lecture, can tell the patient that you actually need to go see a doctor, and this could help kind of keep the patient engaged without taking time from busy clinicians, whether physicians and nurses in primary care. Plus, you could use these chatbots to adjust your clinic appointments. So instead of having somebody reply to you, you could have somebody to assist you with changing your clinic appointment. It's still a developing area, so some of them are more human-like than others. All right. With behavioral health, that's another very important and rapidly developing topic. We have an app actually in our system to support patients with anxiety. So as you're all aware in primary care, mental health problems are becoming more and more prevalent in the society, or we are becoming more and more observant and diagnosing them. So we're getting better at what we do. And using chatbots, you could have a chatbot have the discussion or the initial discussion with the patient. They can give them some advice. CBT is basically a very straightforward, repetitive one. So you can program it, and there is an app on CBT. Of course, there are advanced things, but for many patients, just having a system is confidential enough. Sometimes you just don't want to talk to a patient. And let's face it, we are small societies. I just talked about earlier about my family being integrated all over GCC. And على قولت مثلا كلنا عيال قرية وكل أخوة يعرف خيه. So I don't want to talk to him because he knows my brother, or his brother is married to the cousin of I don't know what. He might leak something. But the system is more anonymous. Of course, it's a mixed view. I think somebody asked about that. It's a mixed view. There are some topics, there are areas where people, especially with relatively embarrassing topics, drug addiction, where they might be more comfortable talking to a system, at least initially, to break that ice, break the barrier. And there are other mixed messages. There is an app, I can't remember its name, which was giving quite good reviews until it leaked out that it's actually AI powered. There's no human being talking to you. And people were very disappointed that they felt cheated about the advisor that was working with them. All right, population health management. So as we come out of the pandemic, a lot of research and things happened through that pandemic. So the system can analyze all the data we have, whether it's in the electronic health record, whether it's in the weather records and so on. help us to predict trends and enable us to have better public health interventions. In fact, during the COVID pandemic, there were a number of open predictive models that would give you a fairly good estimate of how many patients you are likely to have in a particular country in a specific date. So it could help you to improve and augment your system, make sure you have enough ventilation, ventilator beds available, and so on. So you don't end up facing the issue or overspending and having additional redundancies. So these things are there. It's a matter of how accurate they might be. In knowledge management, there was a nice poster on knowledge management outside. Knowledge management, there is this pyramid that you start with data like, LFT equals this, CBC or HB equals that, and so on. This is data, it means nothing, all right? When you put that information, that data together, you end up with information, something that can make some sense and give you some understanding based on the data points. And it's with the huge amount of data that's there available and continuously being collected, and now we're having smart devices that are collecting more data. We're having 24-hour blood sugar measurement. We're having smartwatches that are checking your blood pressure. So we're continuously being monitored all the time. In fact, I use my watch sometimes to remember a specific thing. I mean, when did I wake up? Because I did something when I woke up yesterday, so I check my watch. It tells me when exactly I woke up when I did that thing. And eventually, processing all this data and information for us could help us find patterns that were not obviously available to us or visible to us initially. And then it would help speed up the knowledge processing process and research. All right. Am I going too fast, too slow? Yeah? Just right? Yes? Too boring? Too good? Now, the other side of things. It's not all interesting. It's not all great stuff. There are issues which we need to keep in mind. One of them is really data privacy, data and security. I mean, data security is becoming a big issue. Hacking and so on, leaking of data. It's kind of the new kind of crime that's happening around the world. And data is very valuable. Getting information about people is very valuable, and there are people willing to buy it. So it's a matter of having secure systems, well-encrypted systems. Whatever we use, it needs to be secure. Just like we used to keep all the medical records in a safe place somewhere, somebody has to bring it for you. Remember the paper records? Yes? Anybody remember the paper records? It's somewhere there in the hospital or the clinic, Now, similarly, this needs to be in a secure place. Access. Now, when you have the data so accessible you just sit at your laptop or computer or your phone and you can access any kind of information. Should you have access to all the information? For example, as primary care physicians, you ask about family history, right? But if you have EHR and the whole family is being treated in the same system, why ask about family history? It's all there. In fact, it might have information which your patient doesn't know about their relatives. Now, is that ethical? Can I access information? My patient is Saleh. But Saleh's first cousin has a genetic disease. All right? Should I know about it? He doesn't know about it. It's a question that we need to ask. We need to find these answers as a society. Answering Kuwait may be different from the UK, maybe different from China. So we need to also have regular audits, make sure that system that was secure is still secure. I mean, the hackers are developing just as fast, if not faster, than the users. You might have heard of a couple of years ago now about the hackers who kind of stopped one of the the oil supplies in the east coast of US. They're quite an interesting group. I mean, they actually had a website on the dark web, and they say, we have good support, your data is secure. They have a helpline, so when they hack you, you can call them, and they could help you kind of pay the ransom, and they can unlock your data for you. Very nice customer service from a hacking group. And patient consent, again, just like I mentioned about our patient Saleh, if you're using my data to train your model, why use my data? It's my data. I need to have some kind of consent or at least an opting out, just like any research project that uses your data. Biases. I think there was an interesting question about the app that you could tell you your kind of oxygen saturation, blood pressure, and so on. That's a very nice thing, and it's coming. Now, we look different from the typical patient in the UK there, right? Or we look different from the typical patient in Sweden, right? Will the system work on us? Okay, I have a slightly darker skin, different facial features. So will it tell that I am cyanosed compared to somebody who is white Caucasian male, right? We need to make sure that whatever is FDA approved also fits in here. It's not just in that country. And biases, and there are biases in all kinds of systems. So it might under-triage people from a specific ethnic group, or might under-triage female patients, for example. And we need to keep that in mind whenever we are developing and training the models. And also, like I mentioned briefly earlier, a good model is not always good. Just like, we need CPD on a regular basis to make sure we're updated. Just like when you have a machine in the lab, you need to calibrate it on a regular basis. It could go off track. Same thing with these algorithms. They don't necessarily stay right all the time. And if you use the large language models, ChatGPT and others over the last year, you will have noticed, at least I have noticed, that at certain periods, they were not as smart as at the beginning. And then they went back. Something went wrong along the way. And because they do have a feedback loop in the system. They became more kind of politically correct as well, and more gentle in many things. Too correct sometimes. I asked one of the AI picture generating models early on to draw me an Arab man on a camel. And it apologized because, there might be some kind of issue related to it. All right, human oversight and control. As we mentioned, both myself and Chris earlier, we are the ones responsible for our patients. And AI is going to get smarter and smarter. Sometimes it will look smarter and smarter. At the end of the day, the human physician needs to be the one who is responsible for the patient. They can augment us, but they should not replace us. Because let's say, and I think Chris mentioned it in his talk, it's like he says, we rely on the physicians and making these calls, making the judgments. Because you can't sue e-consult for an error, all right? It should be a human person who's looking after the patient instead of relying. Who's lived through the transition? I think most of us in this room would have lived through the transition from paper records to electronic health record, right? Yes, yeah. Was it a pleasant transition? No, it was really painful. Still a bit painful, but it was really painful because it disrupted everything we do. Again, this AI, we need to be involved in the development process, so it sneaks up on us and on our colleagues. Just like, you just discovered that you all use AI every day, right? AI needs to be like that. We need to design it so it just seamlessly gets integrated into our workflows instead of disrupting everything and making a big fuss. For example, although this is just natural language processing, we're using text-to-speech with some medical background in our system. And it was very interesting. Many people still type with 2 fingers, and you could see a lot of adoption. You have a lot of the less computer literate, let's just say, physicians very much using it all the time. They love it because it makes their life easier. This is how it should be. Should introduce it gently within the workflow using quality assurance systems so that it just gets into their lives, makes people's lives easier, not make life. If it makes life difficult, then we didn't use it to augment. It's something which we are just carrying on top of us. You'll have a lot of vendors coming to you, companies, researchers, and so on, that tell you, you should buy this system. It is AI. So what? How does it work? Many of them don't even know. There is this black boxing in AI. You know, we put some stuff in it and it does some good stuff for you. There's a big movement now towards explainable AI, XAI, where you really need to know how, you wouldn't be able to know exactly the whole thing. I mean, you cannot, just like I cannot tell exactly how you came to the answer of a specific topic, but you should be able to tell me the steps. Should be able to explain to me how the algorithm does what it does. If you can't, then there is significant risk that this AI might take us in the wrong direction. So ask that question all the time. Somebody, and you'd be surprised actually about some of the stuff that they label as AI. There's no intelligence about it. Remember the Turing test. They're just very simple processing that gives you something that looks smart and nice, but it's not AI. Now everything is called AI. Some ending thoughts. I think I just mentioned the AHR experience, right? Death by 1,000 clicks. Remember this saying, if you're not cooking, then you're on the menu. And we need to be involved more in the developments, whether with our local universities, with the industry. There is potential once you open your eye and have a look at it. And if we don't get involved as physicians, primary care physicians, into what AI is being offered to us and what we use or not use, then we're going to end up with another EHR. And this one, everybody will tell you that it's smart. Why are you not using it? The problem's with you. It shouldn't be the case, because not all the AI things are smart. Many of them are, as we discussed earlier, many of them are much dumber than we think. Nevertheless, I think the future is bright. I mean, everybody talks about something like this. There is no place for the physicians in the future, and so on. I like a quote by the previous chief of police in Dubai, Dahi Khalfan, His Excellency Dahi Khalfan. During COVID, he tweeted, it's like, where are all those people that say there will be no place for doctors? Everybody was having a shortage of physicians, shortage of nurses, and so on. There will always be a place, and I think the place will be like the picture on the right side. It's where we are looking more at our patients, talking more better to the patients. The computer is in the background, helping us, not being our main focus. At the moment, there is research that shows for every hour you spend with your patients, you spend 2 hours staring at the computer screen. And I think this is a very recent statement by the American Medical Association, November 28th, talking about AI being augmented intelligence in medicine, so supporting us to do what we do instead of replacing us. And I think the worst case scenario is going to be like Star Trek. We'll end up wearing some very funny clothes, but other than that, still they were talking to their patients. So in conclusion, AI is here. We all have it. It's in our pockets or bags. AI has the potential to transform primary care or all healthcare. And I sincerely think that AI is going to make, if done right, it's going to make healthcare more humane. We're going to have more time to spend with our patients, doing the things we went into medical school or nursing school to do. We should have a role in the development of AI. We shouldn't have the techie people kind of forcing us into a future which we don't want. The current problems we have with EHR is not because the EHR is bad. It was just designed for insurance and billing, not designed for healthcare. Gradually, things are getting better. And you could see that it's becoming more easier to use in some places. AI might have the solution for the problems we have in EHR by using the data in EHR, funnily enough. So the future is, inshallah, hopefully bright. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Muhammad, for this excellent talk about the role of AI in primary healthcare. The questions here, by and large, I think you had addressed them, but it bears maybe repeating. One question is, how would telemedicine and artificial intelligence help while a doctor with good medical skills and what we used to call medical sense could diagnose a patient just from her, for example, gait, from the physical appearance, from the non-verbal cues, with the patient and by listening to the tone of voice, basically human skills, which maybe are harder to replicate, maybe by the AI?
Interesting, very interesting question. Actually, if you asked me this question a few months ago, I would tell you there is no replacement. You know, there is this sixth sense. I still remember as an intern, the ICU consultant came to see one of my patients, the patients I was looking after, and he said, in his conclusion, after spending half an hour with him, this is a very sick patient. And I'm thinking, okay, I know he's a sick patient, that's why I referred him to ICU. I told him that gently. I think I told him that gently. And he told me it actually takes many years of experience to say this statement. And as I developed many years of experience, I understood what he said. And it's stuck in my mind. This is more than 20 years ago. The sixth sense of knowing the sick patient. This is what I tell a lot of our emergency residents. You spend 4 or 5 years with us, not to learn the material in the books. We could just give you leave for a year and just spend them with Tintinelli and Rosen, and you'll know all the stuff that's there, instead of 4 years. But you spend the time to see the patient and think, this patient is really sick. There's something wrong about them. I don't know what it is, but I'm not sending them home. Now, newer systems are starting to look at tone of voice, facial features, and now there are systems that could tell the level of pain of the patient slightly better than we do as humans. It might have something to do with our medical training. There is some research that suggests that medical students become more sarcastic as they go through medical school. So maybe we are we are creating our own biases, so the system's getting better. So really in short, I really don't know. I used to think, yes, they are not something which we could replace. Systems are making big progress, but I think they might be something that it's like having a friend next to you that, you know, did you notice his gait is a bit funny? I think that's where it's going to be.
I think, again, you alluded to this in your talk, but what are your feelings regarding the near future? Do you think we will ultimately be replaced by AI as medical practitioners in the future?
I don't think so. I think the physicians that don't use AI will be replaced by physicians that do use AI. It's a matter, you know in the pandemic, I have some colleagues that were very resistant to meetings on Teams. And as soon as they told us, yes, we can go to the office, they went straight to the office. And these are the people who, when you meet with them on Teams, you think, you know, I'm just talking to myself kind of situation. There are people who completely adopted Teams and they're still using it, but sometimes we just need that face-to-face meeting. It's not going to happen online. And I think that's going to be the case. It's going to take some of the load off us and allowing us to spend more time doing the things that we enjoy doing.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you, Dr. Mohammed, for your interesting presentation. I'd like to ask Dr. Dalia to present for you a certificate of appreciation. Thank you. This marks the end of our first session. Thank you so much.
Certificate of appreciation for Dr. Ibrahim Al-Musa. And Dr. Jaber Mohammed. Thank you. We'll have a coffee break until 10:15.